A little while ago, I did a video answering a big list of questions submitted by one of you guys, and that was so much fun and went over so well that today we're going to do it again. This time, a lot more of you submitted questions about Green Lantern and the DC Universe, and just like last time, we're going to have fun going through these and coming up with answers. And I encourage you to give your own answers to these questions in the comments section of this video. Keep the discussion going if there's something you find particularly interesting. And don't forget to ask your own questions, if you have any, so that we can do another one of these videos in the future. But with all that said, let's get into it, because there's a lot to cover. Before I get to this round of questions, I want to address one that I didn't fully answer last time. Ken Liston asked me to keep one human as a Green Lantern and assign the rest to other cores, and I only really did 2 of them. I'd keep Simon Green since he has the most unresolved plot lines and untapped story potential, and I'd want to see Guy deal with the legacy of the Red Lanterns, since that group meant a lot to him and was a big part of his ongoing development. As for all the others, it should go without saying that I want more of Jessica as a Yellow Lantern since her entire character is defined by her ongoing struggle to cope with her own fear and anxiety, and this allows her to directly interact with fear in a brand new way, which could do wonders for her growth as a person. For John, I think it would be interesting to give him a blue ring, not because I think he could use it, but because of what it could mean for him to try to be able to use it. John has always fixated either on his own past or whatever task is right in front of him at the moment, and he almost never looks to the future. I'd love to see St. Walker put a Blue Lantern ring down in front of him and just say, "It'll be here for you when you're ready." And then watch John confront the fact that it's been a very long time since he's actually hoped for a better future. The whole point of these rings is to reflect how their users see themselves and the world, and they can be excellent tools to let a character grow into something more than what they've always been. Similarly, I think Hal could get a lot out of spending some time as a Star Sapphire, since love and relationships have always been a weakness of his. Disconnecting his willpower from his superpowers, while forcing him to engage with the feelings of others, has the potential to help Hal gain some much-needed emotional maturity and take away his ability to run off to the stars whenever things get tough. I would make Joe an Indigo Lantern as a way to further explore the themes of emotional expression and suppression found in Far Sector. In that story, people had their emotions removed to avoid chaos and violence, while the Indigo Tribe works by overwriting your chaotic violent tendencies by forcing you to experience emotion. I think this would build on Joe's experiences really well. And last but not least, I would make Kyle an Orange Lantern, pretty much because he's one of the only people who's actually been able to use the orange light without losing himself to it, thanks to his time as a White Lantern. So with that out of the way, let's get into the new batch of questions, starting with this one from Doc Apathy. Is there a Green Lantern concept you'd like them to do more with? I'd be interested in seeing the Alpha Lanterns come back. The very first place my mind goes is to the White Lantern Corps, which was created at the end of the Green Lantern New Guardians series when Kyle Rayner decided to split his White Lantern ring into 7 rings and recruit 6 new White Lanterns. A couple of them were characters who'd been established over the course of the New Guardians run, but the rest were brand new characters who first appeared when they got their rings, and they teamed up to beat the big bad of that arc before flying off into space, never to be seen again as of the time of this recording. It's an entire Lantern Corps, albeit a small one, but they've never done anything at all after the story that created them. Bring them back, flesh them out, give them something to do, and embrace the limitless possibilities this Corps represents in terms of storytelling potential. And while they're at it, maybe take this opportunity to clearly define the powers of a White Lantern for literally the first time ever. The other thing that comes to mind is that, as far as I remember, Simon Baz never resolved the events that had him on the run from the United States government. All of that got interrupted by yet another army of space zombies trying to assimilate all life in the universe, and then the whole suspected terrorist thing stopped coming up except for the occasional mention when Simon talks about his own past. I think it would actually make a lot of sense for Amanda Waller to recruit Simon for the Suicide Squad. She knows how powerful and versatile Green Lanterns are, and fixing his situation with the government is the perfect motivation to get him to join. It would be good for the character, since the Suicide Squad is such a big brand these days, and it would be good for us as Green Lantern fans, since it would let Green Lantern benefit a little bit from the success and popularity of the Suicide Squad. Unless the thing I'm talking about already happened in that short-lived Justice League of America book that Simon was in. I didn't read the entire series, but that team was run by the government, so it's possible that Simon's involvement came in exchange for expunging his criminal record. Either way, I still think Simon would be a good fit for the Suicide Squad, at least for a little while. Nelvin Chan asks, would you ever cover the series of lesser-known lanterns, such as the Phantom Lantern or the Ultraviolet Lantern? So if you want to hear my thoughts on the Ultraviolet Lanterns, I talk about them in my video titled Jon Stewart and the Legacy of a Fatal Mistake. There's not much else to say about them right now, but that may change, since the Future State Justice League shows us a Legion of Doom that had an alien Ultraviolet Lantern as a member, and since the variant cover for Dark Crisis #1 features the Future State Justice League, maybe some of those villains will start to show up too, meaning we could get some more Ultraviolet Lantern action to talk about. As far as Frank Leminski and his Phantom Ring, I did talk about it back in my video about Every Earth Lantern, but it's worth revisiting that story eventually, since all I really did for the video was focus on Frank specifically, not the impact that his ring had on Simon and Jessica. It's weird though, because the Phantom Ring came around at the same time as a few similar rings that all did just about the exact same thing without much to make any of them stand out from the others. The Phantom Ring lets you use every power in the emotional spectrum, which is exactly like the Universal Ring that was created for a crossover between Green Lantern and Planet of the Apes, and both of these are derivative of the White Lantern Ring. They try to make the Phantom Ring stand out by making it an early prototype ring that's actually super dangerous to use because it doesn't have any safeguards to protect the user from unfiltered exposure to the full emotional spectrum. But that doesn't change the fact that a single ring being able to use every color of lantern power is an idea that was done already. Retrobite asks, are exobyte-powered metahumans with Green Lantern powers considered Green Lantern Corps, or do they just simply have Green Lantern powers? This is a question concerning DC Universe Online's Earth. So we're talking about DC Universe Online, a game I've never played, so I might get some details wrong. But as I understand it, this is an MMO where you play as a human who's been given enhancements that let you use powers similar to established DC characters. You get these powers from exobytes, which are technology created by Brainiac to analyze and replicate metahuman abilities. For example, you can get super speed because exobytes studied the Flash, that sort of thing. All that to say, there are people running around the world of this game using green hard light constructs that mimic the power of Green Lanterns. And if you play along with the story missions, your light-wielding character can be deputized by the Green Lanterns to help fight off the Sinestro Corps, which technically does make your character a member of the Green Lantern Corps. But either way, I would still consider an exobyte-powered metahuman who makes green hard light constructs to be a Green Lantern. A lot of people would probably say the opposite, that if you don't have a ring and a badge, you're not a real Green Lantern. But then I think about Alan Scott, specifically during the 1990s, when DC wanted there to only be one Green Lantern. They changed his hero name to Sentinel, they changed his hero costume to something sleek and modern, they changed his symbol to a starburst, they de-aged him to make him look younger, they took away his ring and made his powers an internalized part of him. They did all of this stuff to make him not be a Green Lantern anymore. And I looked at him, and what I saw was Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, wearing a modern reimagining of his Green Lantern costume and still using Green Lantern powers. No matter what pedantic changes DC made to him, he never stopped being a Green Lantern. And the same goes for his daughter. Jenny Lin only officially became a Green Lantern when Kyle gave her a ring, but before that she'd always had internalized powers that are functionally identical to Green Lantern powers in every way. Am I really supposed to pretend that she wasn't always a Green Lantern? That's just silly. The next series of questions all come from Tevya Smolka. I'm just wondering, how do you feel about Teen Lantern and how would you fix the character and make her interesting? I don't think Kelly needs fixing, she just needs to be focused on as a primary character. With a couple brief exceptions, this character has never been at the center of a story. She's always just been one of the larger group and gets lost in the crowd. The cast of Young Justice got pretty huge by the end of that series, and the book was so busy trying to juggle them all, introducing new characters to the team, while also reintroducing fan-favorite characters that we hadn't seen together in a decade. That book was packed and didn't have any room to give Kelly her due, outside of one issue that showed parts of her origin story. And then she joined the cast of the Green Lantern book, and once again she's swept up in the chaotic madness of all these characters falling all over each other during one of the most traumatic moments in the history of the Corps. And again, so much is going on that there isn't enough room to focus on her. And maybe that's by design. Maybe this video will age super poorly because the plan was always to set Kelly up only to delve deeply into her character later. But if that's the plan, they're taking way too long getting to it. Kelly first showed up in Young Justice #1 in January of 2019. She's been appearing in comics consistently for 3.5 years, and we still barely know anything about her at all. What would I do to fix Teen Lantern and make her more interesting? Give her a story arc. Tell a full-length story where she and one other character go on an adventure together, where that's the only focus. Kelly doesn't need fixing because you can't fix what's not there. You can only fill in the empty space with something good. Tell stories with this character. Tell stories about this character. Make her into a character that people get excited about. There is no such thing as a bad character, and all it takes is for one writer to have a good idea. How would you bring back the other core members from the other Lantern Corps and would add new members to each Lantern Corps? I actually think the fact that we haven't seen most of the other Corps in so long makes it easier to bring them back into the spotlight. It's been so long since we've seen them, and they've been active that entire time, so they really could have been doing anything at all that you can imagine. And no spoilers, but if we take into account the way things just recently changed in Green Lantern #12, the balance of power between the various corps is totally different now. Their size, their relationships with each other, what the rest of the universe thinks of them, it's all different now, in a way that can lead to some alliances and rivalries that have the potential to be a lot of fun. Especially when you think about the fact that, unless the Red and Indigo Lanterns have been growing their numbers, the Sinestro Corps is now the largest and most powerful Lantern Corps in the universe. As for introducing new members, I'd bring back the temporary entity host that we haven't seen since 2010 after Blackest Night ended. Nicole Morrison was the host for Adara, the Hope entity, Abraham Point was the host for the Predator, the Love entity, Shane Thompson was the host for Proselyte, the Compassion entity, and James Kim was the host for the Butcher, the Rage entity. Each of these characters got one issue, maybe 1.5, before they were stripped of their power and then never seen again. Bringing back these characters as new Lanterns who don't know anything would be an easy way to reintroduce and explore each of these cores. They make natural point of view characters that also help humanize all this cosmic weirdness. Since we are finally getting another Green Lantern animated movie this year, what are you looking forward to and what do you want to see from that movie? I kinda just want to see them tell an original story that gets to the heart of what makes the character so great. At the time that I'm recording this, we still don't know anything at all about this movie other than the fact that it's happening, so we don't even know which Green Lantern or Lanterns it'll be about. But I think, in general, what I want the most out of a movie like this is for it to be a nice, short, high-quality example of why I like Green Lantern so much. I don't think they need to adapt any existing material to do that. They just have to understand the characters. With the upcoming Dark Crisis event coming up real soon and focusing on legacy characters, I'm just wondering what characters do you want to form this new Justice League, and that's not the future state nonsense we got from last year. So, this is the question that took me the longest. My intention was to come up with a solid, well-balanced team of 7 or 8 legacy characters whose powers and personalities complement each other. But because I love legacy characters so much, I couldn't narrow it down to a team that small. So instead, I'm going for a Justice League Unlimited approach. A big team where we only focus on a few characters on every mission, and then they can all do something huge together once in a while. Dick Grayson and Wally West are the heart and soul of the DC universe. Nightwing has all the best qualities of Batman while also being well-adjusted and happy. He'll save your life with a smile on his face, and every hero in the DC universe likes and respects him. He's the perfect leader for the Justice League. And Wally did such a good job of replacing his predecessor that there are entire generations of fans that think of him as the Flash. It's normal to think of him in the same category as Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. On top of that, he's the fastest Flash with the strongest connection to the Speed Force. These two characters by themselves are proof of the value of legacy characters and serve as a great foundation for a rock-solid team. And I'd build that team out of characters like the Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle and the Khalid Nasser Dr. Fate, two characters who you wouldn't expect to get along since one of them leans hard into sci-fi technology while the other is all about ancient magic, but I actually think they become fast friends once they realize that both of them get their powers from a piece of sentient armor that can and will take over their bodies sometimes. It's a really specific problem that very few people have, so I think these two would bond over it. Then there's Mary Marvel and Miss Martian, two characters who I feel like should have been A-list by now, but just never made it. This team needs muscle and they're it, and when they're not busy punching bad guys into orbit, they're holding the team together. Miss Martian knows from her own experience what it's like to live with a horrible secret, and that fact paired with her telepathy makes her the perfect person for any of her teammates to go to when they need to talk something out. On top of that, Mary Marvel has unwavering optimism and refuses to become jaded by the modern world, making her a wholesome powerhouse who's unwilling to give an inch to self-doubt or despair. As for lanterns, I'd have two, the Green Lantern Guy Gardner and the Red Lantern John Moore, aka Rancor. Despite being a human lantern, John never really got folded into the larger DC universe. Hell, he rarely ever interacted with anyone who wasn't also a Red Lantern, and putting him on the Justice League is an easy way to more firmly establish him. Guy is there because he's the one Earth hero John already knows, and Guy would absolutely be ready and willing to help John get to know everybody and acclimate to this new environment. But I think there's potential in exploring how John feels about Guy going back to the Green Lantern Corps, possibly feeling like Guy turned his back on the Reds who supposedly meant so much to him. A team this big and powerful needs brains to match, so we may as well get the best. John Henry Irons, aka Steel, and Michael Holt, aka Mr. Terrific. Between the two of them, they've got everything covered from mechanical engineering to theoretical physics. They come up with airtight plans of attack and then do just as well in the actual fight. Mr. Terrific is another Golden Age legacy who made his mark on the Justice Society, and if that same approach to legacy is going to be the basis for a new Justice League, he's an asset they can't afford to go without. And Steel is a living reminder of the aspirational ideals that make superheroes meaningful. He's a normal man who stepped up to fill the shoes of Superman. All he had was his brains and a hammer, and he wasn't about to let Superman's legacy end. That's the kind of spirit and commitment this team needs as its backbone. And while we're on the topic of geniuses, I also want the Kimio Hoshi Dr. Light, who's both a scientist and an actual medical doctor, as well as Ray Terrell, aka the Ray. Both of these characters have more or less the same light-based powers, making them redundant in that way, but I think that actually presents an opportunity for both of them to grow. She can teach him about the science of how their powers work, making him a more effective hero, and he can help convince her to stop focusing on work all the time. Maybe even inspire her to change some things about her superhero identity, since she's existed since 1985 and still uses the name and costume of a known supervillain. Now for the rest of these characters, I should make it clear that I honestly don't see the point in having teams of heroes and villains if you're not going to include at least one or two characters that rarely get the attention they deserve and almost never show up anywhere else. These are the kinds of characters who have the potential to be the most fun, since writers generally have more freedom when they're not working on the stars of big-name franchises. Which is why I'd use this as an opportunity to give much more of the spotlight to Connor Hawke, the second Green Arrow, and Nayeli Constant, the current Aztec. Connor was Green Arrow when Kyle Rayner was the only Green Lantern, and had a friendship with both Kyle and Wally West, and even served on the Justice League once before. But unfortunately, he faded into obscurity once Oliver Queen came back. He's just kind of been floating around since then, popping up every once in a while, but never finding a permanent home or establishing his own identity in the DC universe the way Nightwing managed to split off from Batman. Similarly, I don't think most readers even know Nayeli Constant exists, and probably haven't seen or heard of anyone going by the name Aztec since the 1990s. Awareness of these characters is so low that the best shot they have is to make a good impression in an ongoing book that everybody was already going to be reading anyway, where they can endear themselves to people over time and then hopefully spin off into something else afterwards. But while those two may be more obscure, I wouldn't call them weird, and the last pair that I'm adding to this team fill that role nicely. Of course I'm talking about the Third Airwave and the Gold Beetle. And you're probably asking, who? Which is understandable, because not many people remember that Green Lantern Hal Jordan has a cousin with the power to control radio waves, whose name is also Hal Jordan, for literally no good reason. And Hal has always wanted to be a hero, but could never really make it work. He's overeager and doesn't really know what he's doing. He's a perfect match for the Gold Beetle, a time traveler from the future and inheritor of the legacies of both Booster Gold and Blue Beetle, who's bursting with manic fangirl energy and knows much, much more than it seems. Why did she travel back in time to this specific moment and join this specific incarnation of the Justice League? Is she here to stop something or make sure something happens? Can she be trusted, or is her bubbly nature just a way to keep everyone from suspecting her true intentions? So there it is, my 16-member Justice League made entirely of legacy characters. I could have added more, but we'll leave it at that for now. You know what, 17, I'm adding the third Terra. Her name is Atlee. She's from a race of mole people who gave her a human form so she could go to the surface and protect the environment with her power to control the ground, while having to deal with both her lack of understanding about how the surface world works and the burden of the legacy that goes with being the next Terra. She's mingled with the superhero community a little here and there, but she's mostly hung out with Power Girl, who functioned as both her guide and the first real friend Atlee made since leaving home. And actually, Power Girl is also a legacy character, and I love the friendship between these two and really want to see more of it. So what the hell, they're both on the team. So there it is, my 18-member Justice League made entirely out of legacy characters. I'm just going to move on now because I could just keep adding more forever. If you were in charge of making another Green Lantern animated series, or continuing the original series, I'm just wondering, what storylines would you adapt? I think that since the first season of Green Lantern the Animated Series was all about adventures in space, maybe for season 2 you bring it back down to Earth. Hard-traveling heroes is a concept built for episodic storytelling. A couple characters traveling across country by truck, encountering new characters and adventures every time they come across another new town. It's not perfect, and you'd have to come up with explanations for why they're not just flying to their destination and why they're on this trip in the first place. But I think it would be a nice way to keep the show feeling fresh after leaning so hard into huge space epics for the first season. Also, this opens the door to potentially seeing more cameos from the larger DC universe pop up for a single episode. With Jessica Cruz still being a Yellow Lantern in the current DC universe and Simon Baz kind of being missing right now, what would you do if you were in charge of doing a Green Lantern book, and how would you bring those characters back as a team? I would follow up on a story thread that's been left hanging since the first arc of their series. Green Lanterns began with Simon and Jessica dealing with a Red Lantern invasion of Earth, and it ended with the Red Lanterns successfully planting the Rage seed within the Earth's core. That seed would feed off of all the rage generated by the human race and grow into a brand new rage entity. And while Simon and Jessica were able to kick the Red Lanterns off Earth, they never knew anything about the rage seed, so it's still down there, growing in the Earth's core, and nothing's ever been done about it. Now that it's been a while, maybe the new rage entity is big enough and close enough to emerging that its presence can be detected. Maybe it's making the human population angrier in general just by being inside the Earth all the time. And since Simon and Jessica were the ones to handle the last Red Lantern incident on Earth, they get sent in to investigate and deal with the situation. I think this would work regardless of whether Jessica is green or yellow, since I think she's the Yellow Lantern of Earth's sector anyway, and her ring would be able to detect all that rage energy just as well as a Green Lantern could. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it would be better if she was still a Yellow Lantern, because then there could be tension between her and Simon that gets increased by their prolonged exposure to the energy of the rage entity, and working through that would just make them even closer friends once it's all over, even if they are on two different teams now. GHS Comics says, if you could have your dream writer for a new Lantern book, who would you want to write it? I'd like to see what Kyle Higgins could do. The very first thing I thought of was something that we actually almost got. At one point, not too long ago, DC was planning to start up a new line of horror comics, with the flagship book being a Green Lantern series written by Jeff Lemire, and it fell apart because of all the editorial chaos that was going on at the time, and led to Jeff Lemire parting ways with DC for the foreseeable future. And that sucks, because when it's done right, horror is one of my favorite genres, and the Lanterns are such a perfect fit for those kinds of stories. It's already an entire franchise built on how we relate to fear. It should be a no-brainer to make some really well-done psychological, cosmic, supernatural horror comics with these characters. As for writers who I think could deliver on that concept, I'd be really excited to see what Dan Watters could do. He's the writer of Homesick Pilots, a horror book from Image that has all of the big, over-the-top action and fun you expect from a superhero comic, while simultaneously using it to tell an incredibly grounded, uncomfortably relatable horror story that takes the concept of a haunted house and presents it in a way I've never seen before. And it's exactly as scary as it is silly. I think this kind of story would make a good template for how to do superhero horror, and I could easily see a story like this working in a world of Power Rings. Lance wants to know, if Alan's signature construct is a train and Hal's is his dad's jet, what would yours be? The thing I like most about what Alan and Hal are doing with those constructs is that they're taking the source of their greatest fear and trauma and turning it into something that can help them succeed. All of my greatest fears are way too hard to represent visually as an object, so maybe I go with the thing that scared me the most as a little kid, the boogeyman from the real Ghostbusters cartoon. This thing freaked the hell out of me back then. And if you're thinking that it just looks kinda silly, look up a clip of this thing talking, because the voice they gave it, I'm freaking myself out just thinking about it. My enemies would be done if I sent a big green one of these after them. And to wrap things up, Ken Liston wants to know, if you had to change one thing about every human Green Lantern, what would it be? And what would be something you change about current day Hal Jordan? So let's run through them. This might sound like a cop-out, but I think Alan Scott has changed enough recently, and they should just spend more time with the character in general to see what his life is like now. Honestly, the biggest change that needs to be made is to the amount of exposure that he gets. Showing up in anthologies and miniseries packed with dozens of other heroes is nice and all, but it's never going to give us the time we need to explore and understand this new stage in Alan's life. So make him the star of something longer, even if it's only a one-shot, because a complete and uninterrupted issue's worth of story focusing on Alan Scott is something the character desperately needs right now. Moving on to Hal Jordan, the thing I find the most frustrating about him is the endless cycle he lives in. He's a pilot who always does something reckless at work and either gets fired or is about to get fired. He's trying to date Carol but always says or does something to screw it up and they either break up or are about to break up. And then instead of dealing with any of this, he just goes to space for a while, and then when he gets back, the cycle resets and we do it all over again. I would stop resetting the cycle and make this character move on to new things. Move on from Carol, move on from Ferris Air, get a new job and make new friends. Maybe he could work as a charter pilot, or maybe not as a pilot at all. Maybe he burned all of those bridges, and now he values his time as a Green Lantern even more because that's when he gets to fly. I think it would actually do Hal a lot of good to get a job at some kind of small mom and pop store where there are no huge government contracts to worry about and everybody's more friendly and laid back. It'd make doing Green Lantern stuff easier, while also exposing him to an entirely new supporting cast of regular people who can become part of his daily life. John is a hard one because they're already doing the thing I would normally give as an answer to this question. Jeffrey Thorne's Green Lantern series is following up on his character progression in Green Lantern Mosaic, effectively putting back something vital that was taken away from the character a long time ago. The only other thing I can think of right now is that I hope this change sticks around for a while, so we can take it even further and explore it not simply as the culmination of an arc, but the new normal of this character and what that means for his future. For Guy, I would make all of his retconned backstories into one timeline. So he's been a lawyer, a gym teacher, a bartender, and a cop, but failed at all of them, stressing how important the Green Lantern Corps is to him, since that's the one thing he knows he can be good at. He already loves the Corps more than any of the other humans, and this would help explain why. And maybe they already did that. I'm not sure. It's confusing. And then there's Kyle, who I think has lost a lot of his individuality since the Green Lantern Corps came back in 2005. Before that, he was always portrayed as the Peter Parker of the DC universe. He was an average, down-to-earth guy trying his best to live up to the massive legacy and all of the responsibility that comes with it. That everyman quality was just as big a part of his character as him being an artist, and it's a side of him we really haven't seen much of since before the start of the Geoff Johns run. And I think this is a problem that a lot of people see, because I'm constantly finding fans of the character who want to see him become something unique that stands out like he used to. Except that most people think that the way to do that is for him to become the White Lantern again, or become Ion again, or something similar. And I understand why you'd go in that direction. Kyle as a character was thriving when he was the only Green Lantern, but then all the other Green Lanterns came back and Kyle gets lost in the crowd, so the obvious answer would be to make him the only one of something again. But I don't think that addresses the actual problem, because Kyle being the only Green Lantern in the universe was only ever one part of his character, and it wasn't the part that made me like him. Kyle was interesting because of who he was as a person, and a lot of that was tied up in his daily life as a New Yorker with a job and friends and hobbies and relationships, and all of that is what gave context to how he went about being the last of the Green Lanterns. Kyle's life as a regular person is what made him hold such reverence for the legacy of the Green Lantern Corps. It's what made him try his best to fill those shoes, and it's what made him relatable. To get that back, I don't think you need to change anything about Kyle's status as a Lantern. I think you just need to send him home. Because there's a lot of potential in an arc about Kyle trying to go back to being a New York hero again, only to find out how different everything is now that the world moved on without him. Simon is the easiest one here. I would undo the damaging character regression that Dan Jurgens put him through at the very end of the Green Lanterns book. Way back when Simon first became a Green Lantern, his ring didn't have a full charge when it came to him. So during his very first day as a Green Lantern, his ring ran out of power at a critical moment and it almost cost Simon his life. So the first lesson he learned about being a Green Lantern was to not trust his own ring, which is why he immediately started carrying a gun. And it took him a long time to come to terms with his own fear and lack of confidence. But eventually he did give up the gun and trust himself and his ring. Only for Dan Jurgens to come along and tell a story about Simon suddenly losing faith in himself and his ring all over again, picking up a gun and throwing all of that personal growth in the garbage. That entire arc was a weird anomaly in that series. Green Lanterns was a book starring Simon and Jessica, but suddenly it ends with a story about the Corps in general, with the big hero moment at the end going to Hal, and Simon is only really there to lose several years of character development. It was a really bad way to end that series. So maybe I'd change the scene where Simon embraces the gun again, or maybe I'd just get rid of the whole arc and give the book a totally different ending. I don't know. Either way, it couldn't get much worse. For Jessica, I want to see a more thorough exploration of her life as a shut-in. She didn't leave her apartment for 3 years, which is something that always gets glossed over despite how important it is to her character. And exploring that aspect of her life now would resonate with way more people than it would have when she was introduced, because at this point, most of the world has lived through quarantine. Most of us have probably done a lot of the same things she had to do to pass the time, as a fear of the outside world kept us in our homes. By examining this point in her life, Jessica has the potential to become one of the most universally relatable characters in Green Lantern, if not the entire DC universe. Lastly, Jo is still new enough that I can't really think of anything I'd change that wouldn't come naturally just from telling more stories about her. But one thing I think would be really interesting that they could probably do right away is give her a partner. Pair her up with another Green Lantern who's more experienced and has a much different personality and temperament. Someone like Jessica would actually be perfect. They probably wouldn't get along all that well until they realize they're both massive nerds and start talking about video games. And that's it! We did it! All questions have been answered, at least for now. If you have any questions you'd like to have answered in a video like this, leave them in the comment section of this video, and we'll do another one of these at some point. Thank you to everyone who chose to participate. I always have fun doing this, and hopefully all of you do as well. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell if you haven't already. It helps the channel, and is the best way to make sure you know when my next video like this one comes out. You can also follow Mosaic Comics on Twitter to be notified about video releases, as well as general commentary on comics and the comic industry. But that's all for now. Thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan. We'll talk again soon.